Okay, this afternoon, we're going to continue with situational leadership, and I've pulled up a quote here by JFK. Only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly. What do you think that means?
I assume that sometimes you have to fail in order to appreciate success. Am I right?
Basically, that's basically what it is. And I think if you look at the scenarios and you look at people in Silicon Valley, how many have failed before they've actually succeeded? But they never gave up. And that's the most important thing. And I think JFK was a great example of that. Okay, so we're going to do a recap now of basically what we spoke about this morning, and we'll move on from there. So we're going to take a look at the situational leadership model. We've spoken about it, and how this all comes together. Because right now we've got a piece here, we've got a piece there. Okay, so what is leadership? Leadership is all about influence. And that's the most important thing about leadership. How do we influence people to do what? What are we trying to accomplish? Well, we're trying to get them to move forward, to complete a task, to achieve a goal. And that's what most corporations are looking for in the individual, to move them through that process. We look at the situational leadership as an adaptive style, okay? It's flexible, it deals with variables. And how often do we have variables with individuals? We're all unique, we're all different. Therefore, you can't manage the same way. And that's the most important thing. So we're looking at the model as relationships between the leader and the follower. And as I just previously said, no one style fits all. It may work in the beginning, it may work for a while. It may work with one group, won't work for the other group. And the other is, it's a practical, repeatable model. And if we really look at it as we go through this whole thing, it's really organized common sense. And I think a lot of times we throw common sense out the window thinking it's something more, that we have to do more in order to make this work. Not really the case, and you'll see that as we go through it, okay? And finally, as we spoke about briefly, this is not only a business tool, it's also a tool that can be used in your personal life. A good example, situational parenting, and you'll see how that works. So let's go to the model, and we're going to start with readiness level characteristics. This is really important, and this is when we as leaders have to really look at the individual and understand what level they're at in order to apply the right style. So, an R1 is at the lowest common denominator. It's an individual that's unwilling and unable. Low competence, high commitment. What does that really mean? Well, from a leader standpoint, I'm going to task them on a high task basis, but my relationship at that point is going to be relatively low. So everything is about directive. We look at R2. What happens at the R2 stage? Well, obviously, their competence is increasing, therefore, they become a willing participant, but really still unable to do the job. And again, the reason is they're still in that learning curve process. So commitment's still a little bit low. But here, we're looking at now continuation of high task, but high relationship, which is extremely important. We look at the R3. That becomes a little bit more of a challenge. We've gotten through the first two stages of unwilling, unable, to now willing and unable, but then we come up with a surprise at the R3. High competence, but a variable commitment. And what is a variable commitment? Well, it means now they're able to do the job, but they're unwilling, which is really a surprise to some leaders. Why? What happened? Well, this is a stage, basically, where they have to self-direct themselves, meaning that they're going out on their own for the first time to do what you've been showing them to do over the past 6 months or 3 months, whatever the timetable is that you've set. What happens? Fear takes over. Classic example. I'm a sales manager. I take an individual out, they watch me perform, they follow the steps, they feel comfortable, okay, I can do it. What happens? I put them out there for the first time. Now they're in front of the customer. They freeze up. They know the job, but they're on their own for the first time. So fear is the biggest problem that affects an R3. So I'm going to show you later in the next slide what style you would apply in order to get them through that fear stage, which really is critical to their success, and also you as a leader. Then we finally get them to the R4 stage. That's the one we begin to breathe a sigh of relief. Stage 4, high confidence, high commitment, willing and able to do the job. They've gone through all the stages, okay? They're recognized by their peers as an expert. Subject matter expert, I guess, is the term that they use today. Do you agree? Exactly, you know what I'm talking about. Once you become a subject matter expert, my job with you basically is through, to a degree. So, you're at a low task, low relationship side. Now, my relationship, again, this is not about personal relationships, it's about business relationship. It's all task oriented. So again, let's look at these levels because they become extremely important when we go to the styles that we're going to apply. So go to page 38 in the workbook for the next slide, which are leadership styles and behaviors. This now, again, you're going to have to go back and forth a little bit in your workbook as to look at the R1s versus the S's. So R1 is readiness level, or R's are ready, S's are styles. So now, I'll just apply again, they're all coded the same way. So an R1 would directly be an S1. R2, S2, R3, S3, R4, S4. Okay? So just keep that in mind as we go through this. At stage 1, and we've already talked about what the R1 is, the leader goes to an S1 or a directing or telling style. We'll call it directing, I think, right terminology for today. What we're doing here is we're defining his work or her work. We're explaining, we're planning, we're organizing with them. So here, again, we have a low relationship, but high task. So again, directed behavior from high to low. Supportive behavior, high to low. So S1 correlates to R1. That's probably the most difficult challenge. This is where we either fail or succeed in that first level of that new employee. When we get them to S2, we change our style a little bit. We go to a selling style or a coaching style. I think coaching is probably the preferred term today. And basically at this point we're exploring with them. We're clarifying where we are. We're redirecting. We're sharing feedback. So the interaction here is a lot greater than what it was originally, especially in the directing and telling mode. We move through that, S2. Now we go to an S3. We talked about S3 versus the R3. And the R3, as we know, is where we run into a little bit of a problem. We have high confidence, but we have low willingness. And that's important. And we see that fear is what really takes over the individual and causes a problem. So what do we do as the leader? That's where our style changes. That's where our style changes. Now we're in a supporting or participating role. And why do you think that is? Okay, why do you think that is? Why do we have to participate when that person's...
To help the individuals to gain back their confidence and their
Is it their confidence or maybe is it confidence?
their confidence.
What do you think they've lost?
I think it's the confidence they've lost. The competencies remain, but
Yeah.
the confidence is what has been lost.
Well, have you ever been in that situation in one of your jobs?
Yes, I have actually.
You want to just go to the class with a brief
Well,
example?
just a brief example. It was just, I went from the coaching approach where I was working very closely with my boss when things started to make sense, to that I was all of a sudden a store manager and a store associate manager, I'm sorry.
Right.
and had all responsibility on my own in the store, and all of a sudden I sort of forgot everything and got really cold feet and thought, like, I don't know how to do this. But the truth was, I probably did, but the fear of failing, even there, probably made me nervous and you know.
Was that the first time you left on your own?
Yes.
Okay, so even though you knew the job, all of a sudden you forgot everything that you learned.
Right.
Okay, and that's the reason for why they call it supportive or participating behavior. And again, that's usually one that you've got to work on a little bit more, because you have to sense this right away. Part of the leader's job is to also sense that an individual is struggling, we'll say, between levels. This is not automatic. Even though it may look like we go through the quadrants and they're automatic, they're really not. So we have to pull back sometimes. Sometimes we can put a person in the S2 category, but they're still really somewhere in that S1. And we kind of forget sometimes. So again, again, leadership is both an art and a science, so you have to look at it, and it's workable all the way through. You just have to understand that people change based on situations and based on certain variables that we have no control over. So now, as a leader, we finally get that individual to an S4 level. And that's really when we begin to feel a little bit better about both the outcome of that individual and how we are and feel as a leader. At that point, we delegate. We empower that individual to do their job. Why? Well, we trust them now. We allow them to do what they need to do. We acknowledge the fact that they understand the job completely, okay? They're still challenged, but I spend, or in my case, with some of my employees, I spend very little time with the S4s, because I know that they can do the job. They're self-directed at that point. And that's what the most important thing is, self-directed. So I can begin to spend more time with the individuals at the S1, S2 level, but also gives me more time to do my job and work with other issues that I have, we'll say, within the organization. I don't want to be tied up all day. So it's kind of graduation day when you get people to that S4 model. So are there any questions here? Have we ever had situations where a style has been misapplied? Misapplied style, where your boss and you just completely not on the same page.
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Okay, give me an example.
I think I finally had made it to that delegation and empowerment stage where I was fully confident and
Yeah.
able to do the job.
Okay.
And somehow a new manager came in, and that job was a new manager came in and basically started applying the same exact style that I had to begin with, which was directing. So they were micromanaging.
Micromanaging, okay, I hear that a lot.
But I was the individual that actually knew how to do my job best within the team that I was working in.
Okay, and how did that make you feel?
I wanted to run away for a second.
Well, you probably can't run away because it's your job, so, but really, how did you handle that? Did you change your style as far as how you managed the leader?
I probably could have and should have. I didn't right away. I had a conversation with the individual first, but then I applied really like the managing up sort of style where I asked for the things I needed, which was, I need you to trust me that I can do this job, or I need some coaching on maybe this side, or basically coached the new manager of some things that she didn't know,
Right.
but I certainly was able to do. So yeah, it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you actually have to manage the leader, believe it or not, you really do. Because leaders, even though they get caught up in their own things, so how do I manage up what is so important? And just as leaders, what they do, leaders ask for what they want. Well, it means the individual can do the same thing too. Okay, ask for what you want. In your case, you did. And it probably made a big difference. So, most important thing for you leaders when you're out there, and this applies to supervisors, it applies to managers, it applies to team leaders, try and match the right style to the right readiness level. And err on the side of caution if you have to. Because if you're trying to take a level 3 or S3, S4 individual, or R1, R2, R3, whatever the denomination is, and you misapply that style, you'll end up with demotivated people you'll end up with people who don't care anymore, or they'll quit. And we all know what the cost of replacing employees are today. Extremely expensive. So let's move on to the last slide. And this is basically a summary of what we've covered. Directive and supportive behavior. We see that in the model, okay, between the R1, the R2, the R3, the R4, and the styles, the 4 different styles. The interaction, okay, between task and relationship. What style supports what behavior? We talk a little bit about the leadership variables, and that's within the individual. What do we see? How do we make a change? How do we accommodate? Because again, no one style of leadership fits all. And the situational leadership model, as we've spoken, it can apply across the board, not just in business, but your personal life. And again, if you look at the model as we've gone through it, just put your child and look at the readiness model and say, where is he or she in the developmental stage? What style is going to best fit him or her, okay? And that's what we apply. And I'll leave you with that final quote. That one you can think about. Okay, thank you.